Do the relationships in your life leave you feeling safe, loved, calm, and respected? Or do they leave you feeling overwhelmed, resentful, and avoidant to address situations that may leave you upset and uncomfortable? If your answer is the latter, then chances are you have a boundary issue. Take it from me, I have moved from Cape Town to Kommetjie, and I am arguably exercising boundaries in their utmost example by literally just trying to figure out what it is that is making me feel so unsettled. Why do I feel so stressed out by my life? That is why I left Cape Town and I moved here. Something about my life is leaving me feeling like I can't even bear to be in it. And it's led me down this road to discover the book that I'm going to speak to you about today and the topic that we're going to cover, which is boundaries. Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Wallace, and I'm the host of Time for Us podcast. And I would just like to say, I know that these conversations are not always comfortable, and I really commend you for taking the time in your day to sit down or to drive or to do whatever you're doing and listen to something that might rustle up your feathers and get you to feel a little bit of discomfort in your life, but in the right way. So my heart goes out to you in the most sincere way. Thank you for listening, and you should pat yourself on the back for taking time out to do something that is productive for your own well-being. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome to Time for Us. Time for Us is a podcast for the personal growth seekers. And my promise to any of my listeners is that together we will do our best to learn, expand our consciousness, and just laugh our way towards self-acceptance. Please will you stay tuned for conversations that are relatable and create connection. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you walk away feeling seen and with a little bit more curiosity towards yourself, towards understanding yourself. So before I get into the juicy bits of this podcast episode, this episode is sponsored by two sponsors. And yes, I do think that millennials are the only people who actually dab to this day. But you know what? If it's a way for me to truly express the joy I feel inside, then I will dab till I die, baby. So our first sponsor is Dr. Huskisson from the Winelands Laser Skincare Clinic in Stellenbosch. Yes, I know Stelly seems like it's quite a distance from Cape Town, but don't you fear. Dr. Huskisson makes a trip to Cape Town at least 2 to 3 times a month, and I have been seeing him for quite a while. In fact, I actually cheated on him with another esthetician, doctor person, and I paid the ultimate price. So it's one of those sponsorships where, you know, like when you go after something that you want, I approached Dr. Huskisson because I am so obsessed with the caliber of work that he produces that I was like, please will you sponsor my podcast? I was like, I'm going to see you anyway. I'm coming in anyway. This is what I think. This is my demographic. And thank goodness, I'm so stoked that he said yes. So Dr. H is my man. He has been doing Botox on me and mini lip filler for honestly like the past few years. And when I tell you that there's no one that can do it as tastefully as he can, I'm not exaggerating. So I've got a great thing to tell you, and that is that if you would like to go and see Dr. Huskisson yourself, please will you subscribe to my newsletter. I will leave a link in the description of this podcast, and I will send you an email that has a discount code or a discount receipt or whatever you want to do to cash in and go and see Dr. Huskisson and get a little discount off of your first appointment. Okay, so subscribe to my newsletter The link will be in the podcast description. The link is also in my Instagram bio. If you would like to get a discount and go and see Dr. Huskisson, I mean, I just motherfucking mean. And now a word from our second sponsor. Today we also have Leonista. Oh yes. We have the baby. She's my little baby. She's my little baby. Okay, sorry. I realize that sometimes I have to not do the biggest load of shit because people are just listening to me through their ears and not watching me perform. So sorry about that if you're just listening. But Leonista 100% Karoo Agave Spirit is the sponsor of this episode as well. And today we have the little baby, which is the honey reposado. Oh my word, guys. I'm not going to fucking lie to you. Mate. This is absolutely delish. And I've said it before, but it is made with locally sourced, 100% organic honey from the Western Cape. Yeah, look, it's even got a handwritten batch on it. It's just a locally made with the heart, attention to detail, high quality product. Lord knows I need it for this episode. Once again, as I mentioned the last time, I have my little notaroonies with me, so don't be alarmed if you see me glancing down. For those listening, forget I said anything. So if you are looking to manage your time, manage your resources, manage your mental well-being and your physical health better, then this may be the episode for you. Because without cutting to the chase and ruining the end, surprise, but I've come to the conclusion that almost all of the issues I have in life and all of the most uncomfortable ways that I'm feeling in my own existence, in my own skin, in the life that I've created, literally all come down to boundaries. And it's insulting. I find it quite personally a little bit insulting. But it seems that it is quite as simple as that. Yes, take everything I've just said with a pinch of salt. Of course, I'm not saying that like, don't go to therapy, don't deal with your deep innermost issues. But a lot of my personal issues derive from the concept of boundaries, which has been completely foreign to me up until this very moment. Let me tell you how this all began. This whole journey started when I was sitting on my apartment floor in Cape Town a few months ago. It was that kind of like burn after Africa burn, that like burn afterglow period, you could say. And I was sitting in my lounge. I can't remember what I was doing, but I think I was on my phone and I was looking at something on Instagram or I don't know, on a group chat, which I just don't even get me started on group chats. Like literally, why? Just why? Okay, aside from that, I was sitting on my lounge floor and something came up on my phone, whether it was a social media post, whether it was someone's story, whether it was a message on some group chat. But I just remember having this completely confronting feeling in my chest and in my gut of feeling left out and feeling out of place. And I was like, wow, I just felt like really almost like emotionally nauseous. You know, I'm sure we've all felt that feeling where you're just like, something's off. And then you get into that, it's the kind of feeling that is so easy to activate your negative self-talk. That person that's just waiting in the wings to tell you, you fucked up, you're a piece of shit, no one loves you. That voice is like literally just waiting there, like trying to say something. And it's one of those moments that just completely sets that all into motion. So I was like, had this like literally just gut-wrenching feeling of just being so left out. And I was like, I mean, I don't know whether I saw that someone had had like a girls' day that I wasn't invited to, or like a lunch that I hadn't been included in or something. But I was just like, what the fuck? I feel dreadful. I feel utterly dreadful inside right now. And of all things for me to do, I opened my phone. Well, I was probably already on my phone, but I went into Google and I Googled what to do when you have too many friends. And I know to some of you guys that might sound like the most obnoxious thing to say on earth. Like, what to do when you have too many friends? I just was like, this feeling of consistently feeling left out is not actually normal. It's not a normal feeling. And it comes from the fact that I'm spreading myself way too thin and I'm supposedly friends with way too many people. It's just ridiculous. So I searched this thing. I was like, okay, what to do when you have too many friends? And, some articles came up, but a few book recommendations came up. And what's so interesting is The Courage to Be Disliked came up as one of the book recommendations. And so did this book. Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself by Nedra Glover Tawwab. Okay? This book came up and I was like, I would never have associated having too many friends with boundaries. What? How? How would I have never associated the two? I don't know. I can't tell you how I would never have associated them, but apparently I was like, not possible. I never connected the dots. Then I got this book recommended to me and I was like, what actually got me was Find Peace. Set boundaries, find peace. And I was like, that is what I'm missing in my life. I do not have peace. I am in unrest and I am in overwhelm. I am not in a state of peace. So I was like, yes, please order the book. I'm going to call Mickey. I'm going to read the book. And as you can see, I've read it and I've made all these beautiful notes for you. Look at that are going to come out in this podcast. So I'd just like to make a clarifying statement, and that is that this podcast will only do this book partial justice, believe it or not. As extensive as my references will be, it will only be partial justice to this book. So I would highly recommend it as class reading, please. Prescribed reading for the class, read it. Read it. Read it. I keep telling my friends, I keep telling my boyfriend, read it. It is quite basic in terms of the level of direction it gives you as to how to set boundaries, but it has literally rocked my world in terms of the concept of what a boundary is. So following this feeling of disillusionment and I think almost a little bit of shock around how I could let external factors or external influences or people have an impact on my mental well-being and emotional well-being. One of the first things in the book that she encourages you to do is to do an assessment on your boundaries. Basically, there's a quiz in the back of the book, and it helps you determine whether you have porous boundaries, healthy boundaries, or rigid boundaries. And my results came back screaming from the hilltops that I have completely porous boundaries. Okay, so now we go into the first reference of the book, and this is how the author Nedra Glover Tawwab defines boundaries. Okay, I'm going to go and get you up to speed. My definition of boundaries. Boundaries are expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. Expectations in relationships help you stay mentally and emotionally well. Learning when to say no and when to say yes is also an essential part of feeling comfortable when interacting with others. And I thought I would add on to that, so it's not just defining her version of boundaries, but helping us understand the meaning of boundaries. Okay, so this is also in reference in the book. They are a safeguard to overextending yourself. They are a self-care practice. They define roles in relationships. They communicate acceptable and unacceptable behaviors in relationships. They are parameters for knowing what to expect in relationships. They are a way that you ask people to show up by upholding your needs. They are a way to communicate your needs to others. They are a way to create healthy relationships. They are a way to create clarity, and they are a way to feel safe. I think this is a good thing to start as like an entry-level understanding of what boundaries actually mean. And if I'm honest with you, this is something that I really struggled to understand or accept until I had read this book, because for me, in a large part, boundaries just sounded like bossy or needy. And I've had altercations with people where I've been told, oh, you crossed my boundary. And I just feel like it's a word that we've like slutified. We've used it too much, just like the word narcissism. Everyone's a narcissist, like everyone's overstepping your boundaries. It's hard to take it seriously with the amount of times that we hear it. And it just sounds like really uppity and like you're so far up your own ass that you have to be like, oh, my boundaries. Until I read this book, I was like, fuck, you know what? This word has a place in all of our vocabularies. And if we can all just comprehend what it actually means, then it doesn't become this like farcical shell of a word that we throw around in conversation to try and put someone else that we feel doesn't know as much as us in their place. Do you know what I mean? So to further enlighten you, these are some signs that you need boundaries. You feel overwhelmed. You feel resentful toward people for asking your help. You avoid phone calls and interactions with people who might ask you for something. You make comments about helping people and getting nothing in return. You feel burnt out. You frequently daydream about dropping everything and disappearing. You have no time for yourself. Some of the things that I've realized since reading this book is that I am avoidant, which is not something that I ever would have thought I am, or that I think people who are friends with me would think that I am. They wouldn't say Danny's avoidant. If anything, I seem confrontational, which is a fucking irony in itself. But I resonated with a lot of what she said, which stems into porous boundaries. And that is that if you are incapable of articulating your boundaries, you do it through other means. And those means are avoidance and passive aggression, among many other things. So here's what she has to say about avoidance. Avoidance is a passive aggressive way of expressing that you are tired of showing up. Ouch. Ouch. Big ouch. I'm going to read that again. Avoidance is a passive aggressive way of expressing that you are tired of showing up. Honestly, I've been floored by this book because I feel like I've been gutturally punched repetitively through every page that I've turned. And one of the other things she has to say about passive aggression and about not outwardly articulating your needs is that you assume people will find out what you want and need based on how you act when they violate a boundary. Guys, I'm ugly crying. I'm honestly ugly crying. I'm ugly crying. I hope you are ugly crying too. I'm going to read it again because I think you need to hear it. You assume people will figure out what you want and need based on how you act when they violate a boundary. I mean, come on. I do think that I have my moments when I articulate my boundaries, but for a large part, I'm kind of playing this like spiritual bypassing game where I'm trying to be way more advanced than what I actually am. And trying to be like, oh, peace and love, like just love from the heart and all this stuff. And you almost like, you lie to yourself about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable to you, not to anyone else. You lie to yourself about what actually hurts you and what upsets you because you've told yourself a story about how those feelings are subpar, are low consciousness, are low vibration, or whatever the fuck else. And you kind of just like say to yourself that you're letting yourself down by feeling them, so you don't allow yourself to feel them. And instead of acting on that feeling and saying to someone, by the way, this upset me, this crossed a boundary with me, you overstepped the mark here, or when you did this, it made me feel like that, or I need you to show up in this way. Instead of doing all of that, what we do, or what I do, is bottle it up, unbeknownst to me, and then express my boundary in an indirect way in which, in my opinion, it's obvious that you fucked up. I don't say that to you, but you can sense that something's off, but you don't know what it is. You can't put your finger on it. You're like, something's up with Danny, or with whoever in your life. You're like, something's up. I don't know what it is. And then if you ask them, they'll be like, oh no, there's nothing wrong, because they don't even fucking know themselves. They're so detached from their own personal well-being that they can't trace it back to this specific thing that upset them, Guys, we just all need to be better. We need to use our words. Use your words. So in a way, I've realized, running away to Komiki was the ultimate act of avoidance. And I've only had the perspective to realize that in being here. So I'm very grateful to my migration for that. I wouldn't change it because it's allowed me the perspective to see that. But the reason I got here is because I have had no boundaries up until this point. None whatsoever. No concept of what is self-serving, what is too much, what is too little, no limits. Not in a cool way, no limits. No limits on how much I'm spending, no limits on how much I'm drinking, no limits on how much I'm going out, nothing, no limits. So if I don't have limits with myself, how the fuck am I going to have limits with anyone else? Hence, life becomes overwhelming equals run away to Komiki. If I lean more into this whole boundaries thing and what it actually means, I've mentioned this in a few of my previous podcasts, but I have this deep need for acceptance and for being loved and being liked and being received. And that has led me to seeking validation, love, and acceptance anywhere that I can get it. I can't take credit for this myself. I can't take credit for this personally, because the specific statement I'm going to make now came to me from a friend in the back of a car on the way to Africa Burn. How funny. Having a few drinks, having a little pre-draw on the way up. Don't worry, we weren't driving for anyone listening. We had a driver, someone else was driving. We were just drinking and stuff. And we were just chatting about how we were feeling, what our intentions were for Africa Burn. And we have a very similar upbringing. We have a very similar outlook on life. And she said to me, you know what, Danny, I've been seeing my therapist. And she said to me, the reason that you have this deep need for love and acceptance and for people pleasing is because your upbringing was so tumultuous and so all over the show and so uncertain and unsafe that you placed all this value, in fact, survival, on other people's acceptance and on being the easy kid, on being the kid that everyone loved, on making sure that if you were staying with your friend's family, which both of us were at that point in our lives, that you weren't the troublesome child, that you were able to get through life and not get kicked out on the street. It's so wild to me how doing these exercises and reading this book has unearthed all of these deep-rooted issues around why I have no boundaries. In summary, I am a people pleaser with porous boundaries. Self-diagnosed. Okay, so in the book, she defines people pleasing as follows. People pleasing is making others happy at the cost of our own happiness. It happens because we want to be accepted by others. Those of us who are people pleasers assume that others won't like it when we advocate for what we want. Therefore, we pretend to go along in an effort to be accepted by others. But healthy people appreciate honesty and don't abandon us if we say no. Shocked. Look, at this point, I'm like, I believe you now. But when I was a kid, don't at me with that statement, because in actual fact, Yeah, you're right, actually. You are right, healthy people, but I wasn't surrounded by healthy people growing up. I was surrounded by very unhealthy people, and therefore, if I did not please them, I would be abandoned, as a matter of fact. So I'm feeling a little bit of outrage, if I'm honest. I'm feeling like I'm going through this, I guess this is just a journey of like healing. Like I've written this podcast, I've prepared for it, and I have been dilly-dallying with recording it again because it's such heavy lifting and it's such a deep level of unearthing of shit. And I'm realizing now that like the reason I've been avoiding it is because I'm fucking outraged. I'm outraged. I'm dealing with the shit of my own porous boundaries. I'm not having like any level of limits, no level of self-control. I'm not completely blaming everyone else, but it's beyond my conscious awareness. It's the way that I operate in life. This is why I'm making a podcast on it, because my conscious awareness has caught up to the fact that actually no matter how much you want to have boundaries, there's something in you that cannot do the maths. And now I'm understanding why that is. And it's because I have been conditioned my whole life to not have boundaries. Because if I do, it means that I'm in a state of unsafety. And that's why you just got to fucking go with the flow, babe. You just got to be the best, most coolest, most funny, most friendly, whatever person. And look, here I am today. So, double-edged sword. Well, I don't know, silver lining. I'm stoked that I have had this experience. I don't regret it. I'm not hateful towards the experience, but I am actually angry. What were the bullies doing, guys? What were the bullies doing? Thank God for our generation. So yeah, my greatest fear has always been to be abandoned. Whoa. And it makes perfect sense. And it also makes perfect sense why I have completely porous boundaries, because the first thing on my priority list is making sure that I am safe externally. Which is like, no wonder I'm like going through all the shit as an adult, like where I'm finally trying to accumulate some sense of financial independence, and all of it's all making sense now, but it's just sounding a lot like no wonder, you know? Your life experiences dictate the way that you understand boundaries and the way that you enforce boundaries for yourself as a human being. So that touches on trauma, childhood trauma, whatever the fuck you want to call it. I mention a lot about my story in episode 8 of season 1, which is Trauma, Adversity, and the Brain, making sense of why I feel nuts sometimes. In my opinion, a great episode. Okay, it is based on a book called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It is so profound. I fucking love that book. I made a podcast on it. Go listen to it if you haven't already. It'll give you some context, leans more into the concept of trauma and how that impacts who we are, how we navigate our lives. But to just briefly touch on that, in this book as well, she talks about adverse childhood experiences, and they have a survey that you can do which measures trauma and the areas of abuse, neglect, and childhood dysfunction, okay? As I said, I've touched on this in my previous episode, but I can see how strongly it actually correlates to what I'm talking about right now. To read from the book again, the ACE, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, accounts for the following areas: abuse, which is physical, sexual, emotional; neglect, which is physical, emotional; household dysfunction, which is mental illness, incarcerated relative; substance abuse, mother treated violently; divorce. It's also traumatic to move multiple times, she says. People with high ACE scores, which is anything over a 4, are more prone to health issues, relationship problems, and mental health challenges, such as anxiety and depression. I'm pretty sure you guys can find this survey online if you would like to do it. Just saying, not encouraging you to do, but just saying that you can do it if you would like to. The significance of this being brought up for me is that I have had revelations around the ACE survey already. Episode 8, think about where we are now. We're on episode 40 something, okay? I read that book. I had my epiphanies and I was like, cool. And also, I just want to reiterate that I've done the most in my life to detach myself from the story, from this narrative, from all the bells and whistles one can attach to why they aren't where they need to be in life. I'm hyper aware of all of that. But at the same time, you have to be aware of what cards you've been dealt. Like, you have to be aware of what you're dealing with. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing for me to say, oh, just forget about your story. It's all a story. Just live in the present. The past is all fiction and so is the future. Everything's just a fiction unless you live in the now. And like, all of that is true. Life is not black and white. Everything is a dichotomy. Everything is gray. Everything is a gray area. And when it comes to this shit, I'm like, again, if you lean on the side of get over it, you will drive yourself insane, because unless you have a serious skillful detachment, the level of guilt and frustration you'll feel with yourself for not having processed what has happened to you will be profound. So yeah, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it cropped up in this book and I was like, hold the telephone. What are you trying to tell me? That actually all my boundaries and my concept of boundaries stem back from when I was a child and how I was being raised. Guys, I actually took notes that I could fucking give you the real facts here. I went to 6 different schools, okay? 4 primary schools. And each of those times I moved between my mum and my dad, who were divorced at the time. So I was either in Durban or Joburg. So it was like Joburg, Durban, Joburg, Durban. Okay, that's just primary school. Then we go into high school. I went to 2 different high schools, but here's the kicker. Look at these, like, the breakdown here is that I lived in 7 different homes when I was in high school with 7 different people, like not even voluntarily, just getting kicked out and being told you have to live somewhere else. And yeah, I mean, ultimately in each of those situations, even if I wasn't the perfect child, I don't think I was that terrible, to be honest. But yes, I have always been headstrong, and yes, I have always been a little bit of like a rebel. But throughout all of those life experiences, because I knew I didn't have my own home, it wasn't my own home. It wasn't like unconditional love. It wasn't unconditional safety. It wasn't unconditional love. Through all of that, I developed these skills of, even though I can act up, like I'm definitely not discrediting that, but of like completely stifling any of my own needs. My needs were never on the table ever to anyone. Like, my basic needs were met. Sure, like I had a roof over my head and I had food in my stomach and I had a school uniform on my back. I'm not being just like ungrateful for that. But in terms of like personal space boundaries or privacy or any other kind of boundary, which I'm going to talk about later on in my podcast, none of that was ever considered by anyone else. And for that reason, even though I felt those pangs of like when those boundaries got crossed, I felt that burning and that like discomfort and just knowing that something had been betrayed. I never ever had the words, had the like mental acuity, had the understanding to connect the dots that, oh my fuck, someone's crossed a boundary and this is actually wrong. Like, this is a boundary, as in a universally understood by all of society, by psychologists worldwide, that this is a boundary and you're entitled to it. You are allowed to have them. Never in my whole fucking life. Ever, amen. Wow. P.S. Maybe read a book about boundaries. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so touching on the different types of boundaries that you get. Speaking of porous boundaries, there are actually 3 levels of boundaries. See if any of these sound familiar to you. Porous boundaries are weak or poorly expressed and are unintentionally harmful. They lead to feeling depleted, overextending yourself, depression, anxiety, and unhealthy relationship dynamics. Porous boundaries sound like or look like oversharing, codependency, enmeshment, which is lacking emotional separation between you and another person, inability to say no, people pleasing, dependency on feedback from others, paralyzing fear of being rejected, accepting mistreatment. Examples of porous boundary setting: saying yes to things you don't want to do, loaning money to people because you feel obligated or when you don't have the funds to do so. Rigid is the second type of boundary. At the other extreme, rigid boundaries involve building walls to keep others out as a way to keep yourself safe. But staying safe by locking yourself in is unhealthy and leads to a whole other set of problems. Whereas porous boundaries lead to unhealthy closeness, which is enmeshment, rigid ones are a self-protective mechanism built to build distance. This typically comes from a fear of vulnerability or a history of being taken advantage of. People with rigid boundaries do not allow exceptions to their stringent rules, even when it would be healthy for them to do so. If a person with rigid boundaries says, "I never loan money to people," they never stray from that, even if a friend who isn't the type to borrow money is in a crisis. Rigid boundaries look like never sharing, building walls, avoiding vulnerability, cutting people out, having high expectations of others, enforcing strict rules. And the last one is healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are possible when your past doesn't show up in your present interactions. They require an awareness of your emotional, mental, and physical capacities combined with clear communication. Healthy boundaries look like being clear about your values, listening to your own opinion, sharing with others appropriately, having a healthy vulnerability with people who've earned your trust, being comfortable saying no, being comfortable hearing no without taking it personally. Examples of healthy boundary setting: saying no without apologizing because it's the healthiest choice for you at the moment, supporting people financially when appropriate and when you can do so without causing financial harm to yourself. Who said podcasting was going to be this difficult? Maybe it doesn't have to be. But who else is doing this? I don't know another podcaster that is doing this, so I'm proud of myself. One of my greatest conflicts in life has been with myself. It's a perpetual conflict. I'm still in it at the moment. And I have always struggled with anxiety and depression. And it's been something that's taken me a really long time to admit, and a really long time to accept, because I always saw it as like a cop-out for me not having control of myself. And I would always feel like it was just because I had done something wrong or had made the wrong decision, or I should be doing this rather than that, and that's why I'm anxious, or that's why I'm depressed. And like, I would always blame myself for the reason that I feel this way and hold myself highly accountable to getting out of this feeling. But I've had to accept for now, and don't judge me for it, because keep that to yourself. I don't judge you for your shit. But, for now, I've come to accept that that is how my mind operates, and that is what I'm dealing with, and that it is actually the words anxiety and depression. And I experience both of those things. And I'm not pinning all of my issues onto a lack of boundaries, but the more and more I've unpacked this whole conversation, the more I can see that nothing of my current life choices and choice for experiencing life by way of my lack of boundaries is helping the situation at all. Overextending myself, throwing myself into overwhelm, is not helping my anxiety. I can tell you that for free. Feeling burnt out, feeling like I'm in a rescuer savior dynamic is not helping my depression. It's really fucking hard for me. Maybe not for everyone, but I'm confronted with the reality of the challenge that's ahead of me. And I'm also grateful, even though, again, also challenged and also a bit pissed off. But I'm like out here in Komiki reading books about boundaries, and then all of a sudden I get confronted by things in which I have to show up with boundaries. And I'm like, this sucks. Meanwhile, I actually have to accept that this needs to be the practice that I put into place in order to build up that natural mechanism in my body and in my mind of saying, actually, boundary. Actually, I'm feeling funny about this. Means boundary. I can see how the lack of modeling of boundaries for me in my childhood has led me to where I am right now. And fundamentally, it's created a reality that I've been experiencing up until now in which I abandon myself and I betray myself because I have no concept of what it is that I need, because I've never been asked what I need. And I've never been encouraged to nurture that level of concern for what it is that I need or what I feel as what feels right to me or wrong to me. Because growing up, it was always like just overridden. Like whatever I felt to be wrong was often dictated to me by an adult as me acting up or being disrespectful or like just being difficult as a child. So I've associated all of those deep feelings in my body that are my intuitive nervous system response to something being incongruent with what I know is right for me, with, oh no, like, don't listen to that because, no. You're a bad child. You're a bad person. Like, that's disrespectful to other people. Like, you need to just shut that away. And I'm learning to have to like really get in touch with that side of myself and understand, like recognize those feelings when they come up and hold space for them. And we overuse the words hold space, but like when they come up, be able to identify them and feel them and acknowledge them and be like, oh shit, this feeling is my boundary being overstepped. It is not something that I'm comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with what you've just said. I'm not comfortable with where we're going right now. I'm not comfortable with this decision that we're about to, enact. Just coming to terms with what that sensation in my body actually means. And more than anything, the lack of understanding of my own body's sensations and the lack of understanding of what boundaries even are to me, even though I can say that I've been none the wiser to this whole concept of boundaries, I've also been so deeply impacted by them, because every time that's happened to me where I've felt an infringement on a boundary, on a personal space, on whatever it is to me, on a need, on an expectation, whatever it is. We're going to say boundary because that's what we're talking about. But anytime I've ever felt that, I can honestly say that half the time I've just stifled it and not acknowledged it. And again, going back to this whole concept of like spiritual bypassing or whatever it is, or thinking I'm like really so attuned and so aware and I'm so like, oh, I'm doing the most to be the most and to understand the most about everything in life. But without me even realizing it, I have been dismissing my own authentic responses to people and things. And what it's led to is resentment and frustration and anger. That is built, it's stockpiled, guys. It is stockpiled. Like, I don't even want to look over my shoulder. Like, the pile is stocked and the stock is fucking piled. Like, what? If I move, I might topple it over. Stockpiled anger and resentment, which I have been unconscious of, actually, except for the fact that I feel it in moments. And then I've constantly always thought to myself, you're such an irritable person. I'm like berate myself. I'm like, you're so irritable. You're so like angry at the world. Like, get a grip of yourself. Meanwhile, bitch, you are angry and resentful. Yes, you are. Like, why do you think that is? Because you haven't acknowledged your own boundaries and you are consistently allowing yourself to be infringed upon and are consistently betraying yourself, even though like deep down somewhere you know that this is wrong. Like, that's the thing, your body knows, like the sensation, I know that deep down somewhere that this is wrong. However, here we stand. This shit happens. We fucking just like accept it, move on through it, and it's built up this like deep rooted anger. Like, I'm angry. I'm actually angry. I'm angry. I'm fucking angry now that I'm talking about it. I feel less angry even just saying that out loud, to be honest with you, because I don't think I've ever even admitted it, because maybe it also is a build up from my last episode with Veronica, to be frank. Like, now that I've opened up this world in which being attuned to your body and feeling feelings is okay and being angry is okay. Like, now maybe I'm like, oh wow, saying I'm angry doesn't mean that I'm unhinged. It doesn't mean that I'm untethered. It just means that I'm fucking angry because I have been betraying myself for years because I didn't know any better. And now that I'm having these realizations, I am angry with everything in the past. And now I'm like, it's like coming to the forefront. I'm like, oh wow, fuck. Yeah, I can say that now. But up until this point, I can honestly say that I've just been passive aggressive and resentful. And I know that I'm hard on myself. I know that I'm quick to diagnose myself. I know it, guys. I know. I honestly know. Just let me live. I think that what I'm saying is, it's true to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, I've been sitting, I just want to like show you that I have been sitting and thinking about all of this. It's not just me flippantly throwing statements out there to be like, oh, I'm this, I'm that. No, I didn't read this book in one day. I've been reading this book for the last few weeks. I've been taking notes for the last few weeks. I've been sitting and thinking about it for the last few weeks. I've been thinking about my own life for the last few weeks. What I'm saying is true to me. So here are some signs, aside from those body feels, the ways that you might be acting right now, that show you that you might not be setting boundaries but are acting out in other ways. So, things we do to avoid setting boundaries. Number 1, move away. I died when I read that. I actually perished. I transcended this plane and I went into heaven, and then I came back down. I died. I perished. It gets better. I just moved away. This is in inverted commas. I just moved away so they would stop asking me to do things. I've heard this several times from clients in my office. It may seem like an easy fix to blame the other person and leave their physical proximity, but you will almost always certainly find yourself creating new relationships with the same boundary issues. Okay, so first of all, yes, I moved away. I literally moved away to avoid setting boundaries. The truth is that unhealthy boundaries will follow you wherever you go unless you learn to verbalize them. The second one is gossip. Here's the definition of gossip. Talk about people in a judgmental manner with the intent to cause harm, making statements behind the back of the person being discussed. Not gonna lie to you. Like, I don't think I'm a gossiper, but then I was like, actually, I do it when I'm angry. Like, I do it when I don't know what else to do because I don't know how to express boundaries. And it's not, I'm sorry to anyone listening who's a friend of mine who's like, I'm not going to fucking lie to you. Oh, it's a bad representation. It just sounds terrible. It's not what it sounds like, but it also is at the same time. Like, it's kind of like not intentional gossiping, but it's a means to an end because I don't have the skills or I haven't had the awareness to understand that I need to actually confront a person. I would say that mine does not resonate with the means to cause harm, intent to cause harm, but it is a matter of like processing something by talking to someone else about something because you feel like you've gotten it off your chest, but actually all you've done is inadvertently express how you were feeling by virtue of like your boundary being crossed, but not to the person who needs to be addressed. Oh wow, here you go. So yeah, instead of setting a direct boundary, we often use gossip as a way of processing our frustrations, but gossip isn't helpful and only leads to more resentment. It does nothing to improve the relationship or end the behavior that bothers us. The third one is complaints. Complaining to others won't fix our unhealthy boundaries. Similar to gossiping, complaining is another way of processing frustrations. However, with complaining, we usually play the role of victim, saying things like, why does everyone expect so much from me? My husband knows I need help, but he doesn't offer. I don't understand why people can't do things for themselves. Along with not being a solution, complaining, much like gossiping, builds resentment. As we air our grievances, we become more frustrated and annoyed, reinforcing the belief that others are doing things to us. We don't stop to evaluate what we're allowing to happen by not setting clear boundaries. Okay, avoidance. When I bought a new car, I didn't want to tell people they couldn't borrow it. I thought making it difficult for them would end the issues with borrowing. But then they started asking me to drive them places. By not creating a boundary, I created a new problem. There's nothing easy about these conversations. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so we allow issues to fester. Then we inevitably become resentful, angry, or frustrated. We hope that eventually people will figure out what our avoidant behavior means and change of their own accord. Cutoff is the last one. A cutoff is when you abruptly, sometimes without explanation, disconnect from another person. Before you cut people off, ask yourself this. 1. Was the other person aware of my issues with the relationship? 2. Have I tried setting a boundary? 3. Did I uphold my boundary and hold the other person accountable? Cutoffs happen as a result of believing that the other person is incapable of change, that they won't honor our boundary, or that we have let things go so far that we're no longer interested in repairing the relationship. Woe shiners. Woe shiners. Woe shiners. Okay. I've given you guys a fuckload of information, and I can't believe that this is only meant to be part 1 of this whole boundary series, which is blowing my actual tiny little marbles. But what I will say is that I've been guilty of almost everything that I've just listed in terms of trying to find other ways of indirectly setting boundaries, because it's something that you haven't even realized you need to do, or you're just completely avoiding in totality. And as someone who has struggled with anxiety, depression, and with all the other bloody blahs, I feel like I have spent so many of my years just trying to escape the reality of my life, just trying to get out of my own life, get out of my body, get out of my life. And I'm finally feeling at a place where, as an adult, I'm in some kind of power to take control. But things reached pretty dire straits. I have been confronted by, and thankfully overcoming, some seriously toxic behaviors and some really hectic demons that I will touch on in part 2 of this podcast. So please listen to the second part. I hope you enjoy it. It's a lot of information. I didn't want to do you guys a disservice. I didn't want to do bad by you. I know that as you're listening, you're thinking either, wow, this sounds like someone I know, or there's someone I know that needs to hear this. So please will you just share this podcast? The intention is to, create as much awareness and also just build a bit more of a following to Time for Us, which has the full intention of helping us live our best lives. Follow Time for Us on Spotify. Please will you rate my podcast, leave me a review, message me on Instagram, follow me on Instagram. Your support means absolutely everything to me, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for making time for us, and don't forget to follow me for part 2.